Hey, it's Clay. How's it going? I hope you guys are doing well. I wanted to do a video today just to talk about my experience with modelers in the current crop, specifically the Line 6 HD500, the Zoom G3, and the 11 rack, which is my newest addition. I've also spent a little bit of time with some of the Digitech stuff. I think it was the RP90. It was the one where it's just two switches, but it has all the standard Digitech RP stuff in it. Spent a little bit of time with that a couple years back, so my experience with the Digitech stuff is pretty limited, but I've tried it at least. I just kind of wanted to give my opinions on each of them and how they compare with one another, and why I've now landed with the 11 rack and kind of my thoughts on all of them. So I guess just to start off, the 11 rack has really impressed me. It's a really sweet device. The sounds are really good, and it's more of a bare bones unit when you look at some of the other ones, especially compared to the other three. It's much more simple, much more straightforward. You've only got 3 different dirt boxes, you've only got 3 delays, you got 2 reverbs, you got maybe 5 or 6 different modulation. You have quite a few different number of amps, but not even as many as the Zoom, especially maybe slightly less than the Line 6. I haven't done the math, but overall, it's much more bare bones, focuses on, very classic standard guitar sounds, but it does them really well. And I would say in terms of just tone, I think that's probably the #1 priority for most guitar players. I would say the 11 rack is definitely a step ahead from the other 3. Whereas I would say that those other 3, the Zoom, the Line 6, and the Digitech, I think that they all are pretty comparable, but there are just certain things that kind of one edges out over another in certain areas. But I would say as a whole, they're kind of all on the same level, but I would say the 11 rack is definitely a step ahead. Now, a couple of reasons why I think the 11 rack is a step ahead. #1, I think all the amp models in the 11 rack that I've played so far sound really good. I've got a Marshall that's a real favorite, but even then, like, there's 3 or 4 different types of Marshalls or crunch tone amps, and they all sound really good. It's more with the 11 rack. I find that it's more of a flavor, a preference thing. I'm not necessarily looking for a Fender clean. I'm looking for more of a Fender Deluxe clean, or more of a Vox AC30 clean. But all of the clean sounds are good. All of the dirt sounds are good. I don't play a lot of high gain, so I don't know if I'm a fair judge there. But I think that the 11 rack is a very well-rounded unit in that regard, that there aren't any amp models that are weak. Whereas I feel like with the Zoom and the Line 6 especially, I had certain amp models that were my favorites. On the Line 6, the Dr. Z, some of the new Marshalls. On the Zoom, the Dumble one, the Blues Breaker, the Car Rambler, I think. Those are some of my favorites. But then there are other amp models where I'm just like, nah, I don't know if I really care for these. They're not that great. They're not that inspiring. Whereas I feel like from top to bottom, the 11 rack is just really good all the way around. And it's just more of a, what type of sound am I preferring today? Not necessarily that you're picking one because you think it sounds better than another. Also, I think that a big reason why I prefer the tone of the 11 rack is the way it feels. The true Z input, it really makes a big difference. Because actually, with the way that capacitance works, it actually has capacitors and resistors in the box, and it switches between them to actually give you the actual analog capacitance. It's not a digital modeling thing, it's an actual capacitance change. And it does this because the different capacitors and resistors that are used in effects load your pickups differently. So for example, something like a fuzz face, that usually sounds best first in your chain, and that's all because of the impedance that it likes to see. And those things are really important. If you change pots in your guitar, it's going to sound really different if you move from 500K to 250K, or even if you go up to a 1 meg. They all sound really different. So I think that that's one reason maybe why I don't know if that's exactly it. Maybe it could be a combination of the modeling and that, but the 11 rack feels really good. And the biggest place where I see that where I really notice it is when you play dynamically. I would say the Line 6 and the Zoom, they clean up well. The Zoom especially, I think it cleans up really well with the guitar's volume knob, but the 11 rack, like, it's not so much that you have to use your volume knob, but just like the way that you strike the strings, the amp really gives with you. It really reacts to how you're playing. You know, if I play some really bluesy runs on the lower strings where I really dig in, kind of those SRV type riffs, it really gives back, and it digs in and it crunches up, and the amp gets a little bit dirty and crazy and out of control. But then if you don't change anything, you just go up to the higher register and kind of play some very lighter picking notes. It gets clean, it gets more sweet. So I really, really like the way that it feels on the 11 rack. It feels like I'm playing and reacting with a good tube amp. You definitely get the compression, the sag, all that stuff that very much depends on what you put into it. Not necessarily that you just set the gain at a certain level, so that's where it's going to be at. I really like that about the 11 rack. I really like the way it feels. I think that's definitely one of the things that makes it pretty superior. You know, the 11 rack is a really good unit. It's got some really, really good sounds in it. And it is a little more bare bones. So, like, to talk about the specifically the Zoom and the Line 6, I think that they, in terms of providing you a ton of bang for your buck, they really do it. You get a lot with those units. And specifically talking about the Line 6, the HD500, I think that's the best all-in-one guitar rig that you can buy for your money. I think, I don't know what they run for now, maybe like $200-300 used, something like that. That's a fantastic deal for your money to have your entire rig in that floor unit. You don't need pedals, you don't need connecting cables, you don't need power supplies, you don't need an amp or cabs or speakers or tubes or any of that jazz. It's just all in one box at your feet, and you can record with it, you can go play live with it. I used it for 2 years playing at church. I recorded hundreds of YouTube videos with it. It's a fantastic unit in terms of functionality, in terms of bang for your buck. It's a great ambient rig, you know, if you're into that, like some more like non-traditional type guitar tones, because it's so flexible with the routing options. It's extremely versatile. Like, you can use it to record bass, acoustic, vocals. You know, even if you just want to throw a mic into it and just use it as a preamp, you can do that, or preamp and interface. It's extremely versatile. And if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of gear and you want to do something that you know will cover all your bases, I think the HD500 is a really fantastic way to go. You know, if you contrast that with the 11 rack, you don't have a foot switch. So playing live, I have to get another foot switch, and I'm still trying to figure that out. You have to get a MIDI cable, you have to program it. It's just more complex. Whereas with the HD500, it's all right there, it's all ready to go. So I think that that's definitely a huge strength of the HD500. Although I may not prefer it tonally, I still think it's a really good unit. And they're releasing firmware updates. I know they just released 2.0.1 right now, which added some Soldano amp models, which I've heard sound really good. So, you know, they're still supporting it, which is a huge plus. And that's another thing about the Avid. Avid has thus far not... the company changed from DigiDesign to Avid. I'm not really sure how that all worked out exactly, but I know that there haven't been any firmware updates for the 11 rack in a long time, and I'm not really holding my breath. I don't actually expect it to happen. If it does, it'd be great, but that's one thing to consider with these other units. You know, the Line 6 and the Zoom, they both have had major firmware updates that really, you know, from Line 6, I think when I had it, those Marshall amps that it added, as well as this new Soldano, some of the best amp models in the box. As think about the Zoom too, it went from 3 FX slots active at once to a total of 6, with 3 of them being hidden. It added a ton of new amp models. A lot of them are the best ones yet. So the firmware updates are a huge plus for those 2 units. Now, specifically about the Zoom, I think that it is the best, I'm going to call it the Swiss Army knife for your guitar rig. I use it on my pedal board right now, and I love it for that. It covers my modulation, delay, reverb, pitch shifting, crazy, wacky, weird, like synth almost like effects, ambient stuff. It covers all that really, really well. It's extremely versatile for being such a small, compact box. You get a ton of mileage out of it. It's definitely the easiest unit in terms of, you know, setting, tweaking, controlling, learning how to use. The Zoom is hands down the easiest. It's very intuitive. You've got those 3 screens, and then the knobs on it are very intuitive. It's a great unit, and it sounds fantastic. I'm not as confident using it as an all-in-one, you know, contrasting with the Line 6. It doesn't have as many foot switches. Switching between presets is a little bit clunky, so I'm not a big fan of that. I also think that with the Zoom, it has a strange way of the values are very unrealistic, if that makes sense. So like, think about like a Vox AC30 amp. Usually it has a normal and a brilliant, two different channels, and each of them have different tones, and there's the cut switch. But on the Zoom, you basically just have volume, gain, treble, mid, bass, presence, and your speaker cap. And you have that for every amp model. It doesn't distinguish at all. It's just kind of how it works. So it's a little bit unrealistic. Not only with controls, but also with values. If you set the gain at 50, for the most part, that's going to be way more gain than you would ever expect. So like if you put like just like a classic Marshall Plexi at gain at 50, that right there probably has more gain than any Marshall, non-modded Marshall ever has. Like the gain is just way off the charts. So, to get like a Fender clean, you have to put the Fender with the gain at like 5 out of 100. So the values are just a little bit weird, and it takes some getting used to. It's not to say that it sounds bad, it's just not very intuitive. Like with the 11 rack, things are extremely accurate. And like you hear about classic Marshalls, when you see settings of guys who play Marshalls and you try those settings, it sounds the same. It sounds spot on. Whereas with the Zoom, I find it's kind of its own thing, and you have to learn its own tweaks. And it can be a little bit annoying. And other things like with the Tube Screamer, overdrive. If you just kind of go to the Tube Screamer and use it, the level's jacked way high, the gain is jacked way high. So, usually you have to cut the gain in like a quarter and cut the level way down. It just is not as intuitive to use. So it's not necessarily something that I love about the Zoom. But in terms of like efficiency, for being such a small unit, it fits on a pedal board. It's got a ton of great effects, delay, reverb, modulation, those types of things. I love it. I don't want to buy an octave down pedal. I don't want to have to spend $100 to get an octave down pedal. I spent $130 and I have that and more. So yeah, I really like that unit. It's a really solid choice. And another thing to say about the Zoom is it's a really good practice tool. The drum machine in there is really good. And just being able to like do all of that at one little box is really handy, really fantastic. It's a really good unit. But yeah, overall, just to kind of summarize, the 11 rack I think is at another level. Tone-wise, it's definitely a step up. All the amp models sound good. It's not as hit and miss as the other units. The feel is really, really spot on, and thanks to the True Z in large part, I think, it feels like you're playing with a real amp. It gives with you. It cleans up. It goes hard when you push it hard. Whereas I think the other units, they kind of put their own flavor on things. The Zoom has some weird gain values, level values. But it's definitely more of a versatile unit. You can use it in a lot of different situations. Fits on a pedal board. It's really good. The Line 6 is its biggest strength is it's all-in-one. As an all-in-one package, it does everything. But I don't know if the tones are quite equal to the 11 rack. And especially some of the effects too. Like I really didn't care for a lot of the overdrives or the distortions in the Line 6 unit. Definitely prefer the 11 rack in those terms. But overall, they're all good units. When you think about where modelers are at now, even like the low-end stuff, like the Zoom G3, I picked it up for less than $150, and you're getting a really sweet unit. It does some really cool stuff. So it's definitely a really good time to be a guitar player. There's a lot of great choices. But for me, I think I found that the 11 rack is definitely it's definitely a step up in terms of tones, in terms of and there's a little bit more. It's rack mounted gear, which takes some getting used to. You have to use the MIDI stuff, so it's a little bit more advanced, I would say, than the others. But overall, I'm really happy with it. I'm glad I made the move to the 11 rack. So yeah, those are my thoughts. That's kind of my summary review of the 3 units. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback. If you got any comments or questions, anything specifically you want to hear about. The 11 rack isn't a perfect unit. It doesn't have a fuzz face. It doesn't have, kind of like a neutral blues breaker type overdrive. It has a boost, which I think is based on the RC booster. But it doesn't have like it only has a Tube Screamer, which got that mid hump. It doesn't have a ton of delays, and you can't use multiple delays, which kind of stinks. It's not as good for like an ambient rig. It doesn't do the spacious reverb and delay quite as well as some of the other units. But it all, for me, comes back down to those core tones. You know, how well does it do Marshall crunch? How well does it do kind of that tweed Fender blues thing? How well does it do clean blackface Fender? Those are my core tones that I rely on a lot. You know, when I'm playing, I would say maybe 80% of the time, it's more of a straight-ahead guitar sound. Clean crunch, maybe lead. And I think the 11 rack, in those regards, is definitely a step up. So, those are my thoughts. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you soon.